I'll start the recording. And we're good to go. All right. We're going to talk about the characteristics of education reform tonight, and then after we talk about the countries, then we'll talk a little bit about conducting a needs assessment with that tonight. The second chapter in TIAC and Cuban is about policy cycles. I really like to call it characteristics of education reform. It's really some of the characteristics of things that we're dealing with. You know, as TIAC and Cuban point out, policy talk, those cycles that are associated with it, they are, as they say, not futile or irrational, even though they may seem so to teachers, inundated by frequent waves of reform. I think that's certainly one of those things that we feel from time to time, those cycles of reform talk and the action that comes, and then the uncertainty that we feel from that from time to time, and probably the frustration we feel from time to time. But they talk about policy talk in terms of that it's a diagnosis of problems or diagnoses of problems and advocacy of solutions that lead to the adoption of reforms, legislation that governs reforms, regulations that govern reforms, oversight, and then hopefully finally, if there were the actual implementation of reforms. And it is certainly a cycle, it's cyclical. You know, we have practice going on, we have things that are taking place, and then we have the talk that ensues, and that influences that practice, and it is a cycle going around. As the authors say, a common lament among veteran school people is that old reform proposals keep recycling as innovators reinvent them, and that's certainly true. You know, we don't seem to at times have a lot of new ideas. We have reinvented ideas or reformulated ideas oftentimes. I know you all probably are like me. There are times in my career I said, you know, didn't we try this once before and it didn't work? And so that's that feeling, that cyclical pattern of all this. I saw a video here that I thought was kind of indicative of you know what we feel like sometimes. Can you see that video there? Is that showing for you? Do you see a video?
I just see the link to it.
Okay, hang on. Let me stop this right here. Hang on. Sometimes we can get here. There it is. This will remind you of what we feel like with reforms. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Do you sometimes feel that way when we deal with reforms? You know, we're chasing something, but we're really getting nowhere. And, you know, I've really felt that way, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later on. I've really felt that way about the whole Common Core reform. You know, we got geared up and we were chasing this thing and we're heading for it. And then it seems like, you know, we're getting nowhere with it. We thought we were making progress with curriculum and focusing on really what would help our country. And, you know, and as this video points out, I think we had a lot of bystanders, and it's still, you know, we didn't get anywhere with it. So, you know, that make sure we're back to the screen now. Oh, hold on. There we go. So you have that those reforms and that cycle that's going on. Can you think of some examples of cyclical nature of reforms? I've given you one down at the bottom, scripted math. You know, we kind of went away from that, and we come back to it. We go away from it and come back. You know, it's one of those things we just continue to do. Can you think of some reforms that you can share that have been cyclical in nature? Somebody jump in.
I think evaluation of teachers.
It is. That's one of those things. You're exactly right, Jan. as I was conducting class before you all got on here, talking, I guess, to myself, that was one that I was talking about. The evaluation of teachers is cyclical. I was talking about it in some other terms too, but it is. Another one. Anybody else have another one that you think of? Anybody?
One thing to me, I guess, and it may not be a reform, but it's the focus on funding. You know, we've had cycles over my very long career too of feast or famine.
Yes. And it is, salaries has been one of those. It's kind of been cyclical. We get ahead and we're middle of the pack in national average, and then we're behind again. And it becomes a concern. So that's another one. Good. Okay. Well, let's move on. Policy talk does have some, and I've just listed a few here, things that we kind of cycle back and forth. We socialize students to be obedient. We want them to follow directions, and then we go through a phase where we need to teach them to be critical thinkers, and then we're back to wanting children to be obedient again. We pass on the best academic knowledge from the past, and then we say, well, we need to be teaching them marketable skills and soft skills and those kind of things. We cultivate cooperation, and then we cultivate competitiveness. We stress basic skills, and then we encourage creativity and higher order thinking. We focus on the basics, and then we focus on giving everybody everything they want. So policy talk does cycle. We see that. And our country has a deep faith in educational remedies for the ills that we experience in society. We don't agree necessarily on how to fix them, and consequently, that's where that policy talk cycle that Tyke and Cuban talk about. They use as an analogy some like Schlesinger's political talk and political cycles. It's the same kind of thing, and the questions of where does it happen? It happens in the halls of government, in the White House, and Congress. It happens informally in places like restaurants and coffee shops and homes, school board meetings and teachers' lounges. It happens. There are some things that encourage it, like crises that we have. We may have crises that spur policy talk. Can you think of, and I've listed one, the Sandy Hook school shooting. Can you think of crises that have caused policy talk to occur and then policy reforms to ensue? Can you think of a crisis? What's the one that happened in the late 50s?
Sputnik.
Sputnik is one that was a crisis, and then we go through a period in the 60s and 70s of there's no crisis. Any others that you think of where a crisis has caused reforms to occur? Anybody?
The publication of A Nation at Risk.
Absolutely. That is one. That's one. Anybody else have another one? Okay. The second characteristic of education reforms is their long-term staying power. When we have reforms that kind of recede, which is a good way to describe it, I think, and Tyke and Cuban do that well. Do they leave behind structural and procedure residue upon which others can build? Certainly that happens. There are times when we have a reform and components of it stay and components of it endure. And upon those components, maybe there are other things that occur. I kind of think of it as the junk pile here. We have this picture kind of explains it. Open classrooms are one of those examples. We had open classrooms that in and of themselves were thrown to the junkyard, but they left the foundation for some things that are still very prevalent. They were really the foundational time for what we do with centers in a lot of schools. That's when that evolved and developed, the notion moving children into centers and having independent work in classrooms. So there is, we don't have the reform per se still, but we have some residue from that. Can you think of others like that where we kept a component or a piece, but the reform itself really went away? Anybody?
Mentor teacher, because they used to have, every new teacher had an assigned mentor teacher, and there was training. Now for us, it's pooled by one person, and there's large group meetings, but still, and there are mentors that serve a large number of new teachers.
Yeah, it is. That's a good example. Very good. Others? Anybody? Okay. We'll move on. Here's another picture that I think kind of describes another facet of reforms and their staying power, their long-term staying power, and that's kind of the rummage closet or the rummage sale, the thrift store kind of example, where things that we just that hang around, they don't go out of style. We keep components of them. We kind of recycle those. The one I thought was the Madeline Hunter 6-step lesson plan. There's still pieces of that we still use today. It's still a part of many instructional lessons. It just kind of hangs around. Can you think of some other examples of things that just kind of hang around?
Well, I was thinking about the Marzo's levels of learning, and then you have the Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah.
They continue the higher order thinking skills are always there. They just reshift them a little bit.
Exactly.
So they keep them there.
That's a good one, good instructional example. Sharon, thank you. That's a good one. Any others? And Jen, you kind of alluded to this before, but I'm thinking about the pay and the evaluation. That's something that we just kind of, it's been out there. I think I've shared maybe with you as a class before. My early work at Chapel Hill in graduate school, my very first class was to look at the decisions related to the teacher evaluation. And, we've had different iterations of that, but it's still there. It's still hanging around. So, there are things that are out there that just stay. And, understanding and assessing the impact of on schools of those reforms does require some work. We have that talk that's going on that's feeding those cycles. It's kind of the fuel to that, and all of that's going on. But it's oftentimes hard to assess and see how much it's going. Another aspect of that, as I think about the teacher evaluation, is time lag. We have some things that go at a snail's pace and some that take off like rockets. That is one that went at a snail's pace with the evaluation thing. We still haven't. We've gone through a lot of different iterations of it, but we still haven't figured out exactly how we need to evaluate teachers. And so it is a reform that's out there. People understand we need to do it, but it is not going at a rapid pace. The policy talk may follow the short cycles of politics and the media, which we know now are almost instantaneous. One of the presidential candidates says something today stupid, and by tomorrow something else has replaced it and we're no longer talking about it. That media cycle is just a frenzy. But policy talk and policy reform has a momentum and schedule of its own, as Tyke and Cuban talk about. It is there. We have some things that are recent reforms that go very, very slowly, and some that go very, very fast. Can you think of one that goes very, very fast? has gone very, very fast.
Common Core.
Common Core has gone very, very fast. When you think about that in the context we've had it, really just a very short period of time. It's come on the scene, we've geared up for it, and then it's gone away. And that certainly has been a cycle. Can anybody else think of one that's been a quick?
I know in career development or career and technical ed, I mean, they moved very quickly into every program offering a certification, even if that certification wasn't necessarily recognized in the state.
Yeah, good one. Think about safety. Think about when we've had, talking about crises, things like when we've had a Sandy Hook or a Columbine, we mobilize very quickly and do things when it's a safety situation. Can you on the other extreme, can you think of some reforms that have been just terribly slow, that have taken forever and ever? I've given you an example of teacher evaluations. Are there others?
For me here, and my experience, the PLC process has been very slow because it's been around a long time.
Yeah, the DeFore work has been around for 20 years. Any others? I think some of the things that we've done with EC have been terribly slow. We've taken a long time to do some reforms there that are right, but we've taken a long time to do those. I think if we look back to the 1954's decisions in Brown versus Board of Education, what we needed to do to ensure that every child had an equal opportunity, we had equity. We're still working on that. That's been a very, very slow process. So there's some that are slow, some that go very fast. What do you think makes the difference in the speed of the reforms? Give me some ideas.
Sometimes politics.
Yes, politics.
Budgets.
Anybody think of anything else?
A lot of times the district buy-in might make it go a little bit slower or faster.
Yeah, Sharon, and we'll see that as we talk about PLCs, and Jan just mentioned the implementation. That buy-in from districts at times has been the whole thing that's caused it, not to go quickly. So, what else? Okay. I think some of the things, planning and preparation, certainly make a difference. Sometimes ready, aim, or what is it? Aim. I can never get that thing right. Ready, fire, aim. That's it. Sometimes we do that. We're bad to do that in schools. We get ready to implement something and we just run out whole hog and do it, and then we stop back and think, the planning and preparation wasn't right for this. We didn't have what we needed to do. Sometimes urgency can make a difference with the reform. Sometimes with safety. Can you think of other things where urgency has made a difference in a reform?
I'm thinking sometimes test scores and how students perform may sometimes push the reform quicker to where they want to find new ways for students to perform better on standardized tests. So sometimes they may be a little bit urgent.
Yep, good point. The complexity of something. There are things that are very simple at times that can be implemented very quickly, and then sometimes we have reforms that are the time that it takes for that cycle to run its course and for all that to take place. The complexity of the level of difficulty those make a difference in the implementation of reforms. The fourth component is the significance of the change. Minor changes have often become so common as to be taken for granted and not really perceived as reforms. Major, when you think about the major reforms, and that's really what we're talking about in this class, the significance of it will be driven many times by the policy talk and by how long it takes it to be implemented. We think of major reforms as being something that we're going to take some time to implement. We're not going to go out and just in a real quick time frame and make a major reform movement in schools. We also have, add-on reforms. Back in Cuba, talk about that. That our add-on reforms may be, they may have a structural impact. Where our standard operating procedures are usually not disturbed. Then we consider that kind of an add-on reform. We have add-on reforms when we have influential constituencies, teachers and employees wanting their jobs to remain, and so we'll add or keep some minor component of a reform, maybe just because there's that encouragement, I guess, from that subpopulation. They may be imposed by law or mandate. We have that all the time. We may or may not comply with that. Even laws, sometimes, school people don't comply with laws. They just ignore them. We've had things that we were supposed to do, required to do, were passed in law that just never took hold. And then, sometimes add-on reforms are imposed by teachers or administrators. Those typically happen when they make our jobs easier. And so we do have those kind of ancillary add-on kind of reforms that occur. Generally, it's part of another reform, but they come along. And then 5, the varied impact on groups. Tyke and Cuban do a good bit of talking in there about reforms that are aimed at particular groups. And, they point out that one group's progress is underscored by another's comparative disadvantage. And so, we have competing values, we have competing interests at times, and that's a factor when we're thinking about the characteristics of education reforms. What is the impact on the various groups? How is that going to play into the time frame and the success and all of that as we think about the reforms? When you think about some of the reform initiatives that we've had, things like ESEL, that's a relatively recent reform that we're really focusing on children that are not native English speakers. Much of that came out of, and we'll study that a little more detail next semester when we talk in 706 about laws and some of the court cases that have led to that. But it's a legal mandate that is a reform. We've had things like smart boards, and we tend to think about those. There's still people out there struggling now to get smart boards in their school. Smart boards have been around for about 23, 24 years. Many school districts are not doing those anymore, but yet we still have some districts out there, that are trying to get that kind of technology in place. We've had student health reforms, things like health advisory committees and snacks and lunches reforms that we've done, things about eating healthy and having children having water bottles so they're hydrated. All of those kind of health reforms. And as we've already talked, the Common Core. It's one of those reform initiatives that's been out there. We've had lots of things. The characteristics of these reforms in general are, and these are the things we look at when we assess their significance. The cyclical nature of them. Are they part of something that is cascading or spiraling or growing, that is changing over time, that is part of an ongoing cycle? Is it something that it's cycling around, and as it cycles back around, it has a different iteration of it each time, or a little bit more development each time. The long-term staying power of the reform, what is it all about? The lag time, how long is it going to take for it to be implemented? The significance of that change, and then the impact on groups. As you think about these reforms that we continue to talk about as we go forward in the course, think about the characteristics of the reforms in these terms. How do these kind of pieces have an impact on them? Okay, let's change gears a bit, and I want to focus now on a little bit on the Singapore video that you watched. But before we do that, I think, Lauren, are you ready to talk to us a little bit about the Netherlands tonight?
Sure.
Okay, hang on a second. I think I've got your PowerPoint here. If I can find it, maybe. Hang on. Oh, let me go back and get it again. I don't know why this. There we go. Okay. Now, just a second. Let me do the share screen again. And there we go. All right. Lauren, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Let me think here. Hold on a second. Still learning to use this. I want to give you control. In my other class, we had trouble making this piece work too. So let me get this out of the way. I may have to do your slideshow for you tonight.
Okay.
If you'll just tell me when, I will change it. Okay?
Okay.
So talk to us a little bit about the Netherlands.
Okay. Well, I did this kind of short PowerPoint just to kind of hit the high spots. So it was a lot in a really short amount of time that they talked about. I think the video was only 15 minutes long.
Right.
But they really talked about a lot of stuff. But so anyway, just a little background on the Netherlands. The Dutch politics, they've shaped their education system tremendously. They treat public and private schools equally. And what they mean by private are like Catholic, Islamic, or other types of schools. The Minister of Education is responsible for both their public education and their special education. And when I heard special education at first, I was like, well, that's interesting. But they mean special education in private schools. It's a special school, I guess. The Constitution sets for the freedom of education. It means that schools basically have the autonomy to choose how they want to provide the curriculum that they're given from the government. They're not told how and when they're supposed to teach things. They're told just what it is that they're supposed to teach in before the children graduate. So, okay. Next slide.
Okay. Very good.
And again, the government's not involved with the how, but just what it is that they're supposed to teach. And they ask or provide information on like what should be the results of the students. And basically they have kind of like in Finland, I believe it was, they have a exit exam when they're finished with school, what they're considered their high school education. And that's pretty much what they do as far as testing to find out whether or not they're actually getting the curriculum that they need to, or got the curriculum that they need to get. So next slide. I thought this was interesting. Children start at the age of 4. Mandatory school age is elementary school with 4 to age 12. And then kids actually choose, they're given the choice of choosing academic or vocational school. They talked a lot in that short 15 minutes about how much they value the choice that the children and their parents get to choose which school they, or which pathway they take in high school. Okay, next one. The Netherlands has always been in the top group of this program for international student assessment. The interesting thing about this video was it talked that they had been in the top 10 consistently, but in 2009 they actually dropped to 10th in reading and then 11th in math and science. And they went into some more detail about the specific scores, but it just reinforced that they had dropped. They were still in the top 10 basically in reading, but that they had dropped below the top 10 in math and science. They did point out, though, that 1 in 7 Dutch students performed poorly in reading, which they, in this video, they found interesting, and that was part of what they were trying to correct. Okay? What they found was, when they did a study in 2012, that the schools themselves were not necessarily weak. The schools in general were testing well, and they didn't see a lot of very poor underachieving students. So they didn't have a huge gap between high achieving students and underachieving students. But what they found was that their average and better schools were not showing any improvements at all. They were just kind of where they had always been. So they felt like there was a lot of stagnation. The Minister of Education, Culture and Science, they interviewed him for probably 5 minutes, and he talked about how he felt like the Netherlands should focus more on teacher education, a lot like Finland does. They talked a lot about how the standards were not necessarily as high to go into teaching as in some other countries, and they felt like that was what was causing their scores to drop, that they didn't have the kind of standard of teacher that they wanted in the classroom. They also talked a lot about what they called peer reviews, and putting people, veteran teachers and even just, peers that were working in the same school in each other's classrooms, and how important that was, that feedback was given to that teacher almost immediately. And they felt like that was what was going to improve their teachers across the Netherlands. The ministry was really encouraging that as of whenever that video was made. They were talking a lot about how that was one of the things they were wanting to see. They also launched a national teacher registry. What they were hoping for this was that all teachers would be on the registry, but the intention was to show that teachers were working on continuously improving their skills. He talked about how it wasn't a kind of a got you if you're not on the list, or we're not keeping a track of you and how you're doing, but it was more to raise awareness and kind of the culture of continuous improvement that they were wanting out of their teachers. So they were hoping that this registry would kind of push people into the continuous learning and improvement on their skills. They also started a program to help school leaders raise the quality of teaching. they created these groups and called them teacher pioneers. What that was again, they had taken who they felt were top teachers or top educators, top administrators, and put them together and had them going into these different schools and, watching and critiquing teachers and providing feedback and having that kind of peer-based conversation. They did a lot of, what I noticed was they did a lot of videotaping. So it wasn't just written notes. They were sitting down with an iPad or a tablet of some sort and watching the lesson together and talking about what they were seeing together. And that's what they kept stressing how they wanted to make sure they had a nation of lifelong learners and, teachers included. So.
Okay. Questions for Lauren, anybody has, or comments? Good job.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about Singapore. Well, that was one that I'd ask you to look at for tonight, and everybody to watch that one. So, what did you learn about Singapore? Someone share with us something that you picked up in watching the Singapore video.
Well, I noticed that Singapore was doing, or maybe the Netherlands were doing a lot of what Singapore was doing as far as grouping, or they were calling it an outside group or whatever, but they were putting together the retired teachers and the retired administrators and having them come into what they considered their lower performing schools and providing that kind of mentorship or feedback for them. It seemed to be kind of similar to what the Netherlands was doing.
Yeah. Good point. Well,
one thing I thought that was similar to the Netherlands and Singapore was the fact that they like to encourage lifelong learners within their teachers. And I thought that was very impressive as well, in bringing those other retired teachers and administrators in to be able to coach the new teachers. And that would help them be able to, become better in their teaching craft. So I thought that was good.
Yep. Good point. Other observations?
Something that just stood out to me, because I made a note of it as I watched it, was they commented in the one classroom that they used, that they were observing, there were 40 kids in the room, and it appeared that every single one of them was on task.
Yep.
And that in United States would, and I know we have some classrooms that across the state they're probably that large, but we haven't experienced that.
No. And I do think, Jan, on that point, I think you can probably go in your school or any school and you'll find some classrooms where that kind of on-task behavior is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
But is it the norm throughout the school is the question.
Right.
Is it consistent among classrooms? That's a factor. I think, in watching these videos in Singapore and Shanghai and Finland, I get the sense, and again, we've got a snapshot of looking at them, but I get a sense that is a consistent feature of their classrooms across them, and all that I've read about them. So, okay, other thoughts, other observations. Anybody else? As you think back about this whole exercise that we've done here of reviewing Finland and Canada and Brazil and all these countries, the ones that are trending positive, that are doing well, do you see some common themes among those, some common activities among those that stand out for you?
I think one of the characteristics are the focusing. Their teachers come from the top third of their graduates, and they've improved and increased professional development requirements.
Yes. Lauren, your description of their national registry and every time I watch the Netherlands one, it makes me think of our National Board for Professional Teaching Standards process.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very akin to that, very similar to that. Other common themes.
The schools having a lot of autonomy and decision-making power was very common in the top countries.
Okay. That's a good one. Any others?
Well, I mentioned this before. They continue to bring back their master teachers, which really helps these new teachers become better. So I think that's common. I see that as a common thread amongst all of the top performing countries.
Okay. What else? I think you've hit on a couple of the major themes that I see, and I think you're right on these. There is a professionalization of teaching, and it's not just in the training, although that's a part of it. It is in the attitudes about teaching. There is a reliance on master teachers, and both retired master teachers and in-service master teachers. I think those are keys to all these ones that are successful. You know, it strikes me when I watch these videos, though, that many of the reforms that they're implementing are things that we've done. You know, we went through a period of time of mentor teachers and trying to have master teachers that would work with beginning teachers. We've been through a period of time of trying to get site-based management and the autonomy of the school and all that. Why is it working for them and it's not working for us? Without whining. Why do you think it's working for them and not working for us?
I think part of it's because I don't know, just my opinion, we tend to move through things like that very quickly without giving them the opportunity to see if they're actually going to produce any kind of lasting results. Or a lot of times, like I know somebody mentioned funding earlier, we have this great idea and then we don't really think through how we're going to fund it. Yeah. And so then the funding falls out.
Yeah.
I think adding to that, Lauren, the other piece that we don't do very well, when things come and go or the initiatives don't work out as like we thought they would, is we don't provide the right structures. We provide structures, but I don't think they're always the right ones to make these changes successful.
Kevin, are you there? We hadn't heard from you. Or Adrian? Okay. You know, I do think there are some conditions that they have that we don't have, but they're trying some of the things that we have majored on over the last period of time. You know, and I do think there is some value in the analysis of these multiple countries that are being successful. Sharon, as you said, we don't stay the course with some of these things. You know, I think that's a lesson learned for us, that when we do start to implement some of these reforms, we need to think it's going to take a period of time. I think we're impatient. You know, back to that conversation about the policy cycles or policy talk and the cycles of that. It is a it is a news cycle almost that reforms last for us. And if you'll think back to Finland, it's been, I believe it was close to 40 years since they started down the road to doing the things that they're doing to really try and professionalize the art of teaching. And I think as we think about reforms and as we're leaders in schools, we've got to be careful that we think through that time frame up front, and that we process monitor that during the course of the reforms, and that we don't pull the plug on it too soon. As we, and now we're talking the practicality of implementing reforms as school leaders and school system leaders. As you're implementing them, there is that tendency to want to say, "Oh, people are critical because it's not going well right now, or we're not seeing gains." I think back to my own research about year-round schools back when I did my dissertation, and it was once my dissertation came out, and it was at a hot time when we were talking about school calendars and time in schools. I got pretty quickly. I was actually away on a SACS visit at a school and started getting calls there. They had traced me down back before the advent of cell phones. It's been that long ago, before I had a cell phone, but traced me down to get the Associated Press to interview me about what I had learned in my dissertation about year-round schools, because that was a hot topic right then. And my research showed that after 2 years, there were no significant gains in student achievement, student attendance. Those were two of the components that I looked at. The point being, I can vividly remember the reporter, one of the reporters I talked to, saying that, and Adrian, I see your message. It shows that your microphone is not on, so you may need to see if you can unmute that. It's showing on our screen that it's not your microphone's not on. Let me try and do that and see if I can help you here. Hang on just a second. I think I can unmute all. Does that help, Adrian? Can you speak to us? Don't hear you. But at any rate, as I was talking to those reporters, one of them said, what do you make of this that you didn't see any gains? And my study was at the end of 3 years, 2 or 3 years of the implementation of the year-round program. I said, that's great news, because typically we see a decline in a new program that we implement, and consequently, when that happens, we abandon it. And back to your point, I think that's what happens. We don't stay the course. We don't give it time. Finland has given these initiatives and the work that they're trying to do to build trust in their schools 40 years, 30 or 40 years, and they're still staying the course. I think that's the key, and we can talk about all these things, Common Core, those kinds of things that we implement, and if we don't see,
egg rolls you had too.
If we don't see something happening real quickly, then we change that. We change that course. I think that's a very valid point. Is there anything else that you saw about Singapore that we need to talk about tonight? Questions or comments? Okay, let's move on then. I want to talk a little bit tonight about needs assessments. Part of your project for the end of the class, your artifact for the class is about needs assessments. And so can you, let me do a check here. Can you see that needs assessment PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, good. Still wanted to just check and make sure we're good to go here. And so let's talk a little bit about needs assessment. This will be a component of your artifact. You're going to do a needs assessment, and then you're going to do a system reform plan. And so I know you need to know what a needs assessment is. I know from talking to the other Dr. Boyles at my house that you didn't talk much about needs assessment last semester, although she bragged on the class and the work that you did. you didn't get to needs assessment. And it's not a complicated thing, but we need to just talk about it so that you need to know a little bit about what we're looking for. It's a component of several of the artifacts, and this one being one of those. So a need is a discrepancy or gap between, our present state, the state that we have in the particular area that we're looking at, and the desired state, what we think that desired state should be. The need is neither the present state nor the desired state. It's the gap between them. And in most needs assessment surveys, a needs means something that specifically relates to a particular group or community. It's not usually a universal need, such as the need for food or water or affection, but it's more a need that clusters or that is part of that community, that is unique to that community. It's more, though, than an individual need. I need a new recliner for my living room, or I need a vacation. It's not that kind of need. Those may be truly needs, but they're not generally the types of needs that are assessed in a needs survey. Instead, a needs assessment, a needs survey, usually asks about the needs that concern your particular community or your particular group. That would include hundreds and hundreds of possibilities, ranging from trash in hallways to vandalism to curricular needs to financial needs to morale needs to trust needs to racial needs to special populations needs, just a variety of need areas that we can look at. And they're areas that might be perceived by the group as being a need. So here's an example. A desired state, the desired state would be that 100% of our children would be on grade level. The current state is that 73% of our children are on grade level. And so the need then is that 27% of the children must reach the grade level. Well, your work with the needs assessment, whether it's with this project or any project, as you start out to look at a reform, as you start out to look at a change initiative in a school district, then you're going to look at trying to discern what that need is. A needs assessment is a systematic set of procedures used to determine needs, examine their nature and causes, and set priorities for future action. So it's a set of procedures. It's going to be different for every scenario. You can't necessarily take somebody else's needs assessment and copy it. And these are conducted to help people who are planning the programs identify the right tool, the right job. I don't want to use the tool because we'll talk about tools here in just a minute, but the right job or the right solution before it's implemented. And so it's that simple. Sometimes we overthink what needs assessments are. A needs assessment is a tool which formally harvests, and I love this definition from Fenwick English. It says it formally harvests the gaps between current results and the required or desired results, places these gaps in some priority order, and selects those gaps that are the highest priority for action. And usually that's through the implementation of a new or existing curriculum or management process or some program. Why conduct a needs assessment? Well, it may be a legal requirement. Certainly, we have that at times. Well, let me go back here. My notes are a couple of things that I do want to say. I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of these definitions. A way to simplify that, talk about what the needs assessment is that, it's the most important needs of the group. And the survey that we do, the tool that we use will guide future action. And a needs assessment may take different forms depending on several factors. It may be depend on your time. It may depend on the amount of money that you have. It may depend on the people that you have involved. It can be something as simple as asking your population or a part of your population questions. people with whom you work, that kind of survey, or it can be a formal written survey. And it's not always just a survey that is a needs assessment, but that's one of the main tools. But needs assessments lead to action that will improve programs, services, or organizational structure and operations, or a combination of those. And so, to go back and make sure I said that. The legal requirements are there. It may be a program requirement. It may be to guide work that the organization will do. It could be a benchmark tool, and it does result in an action plan. To learn more about what a group or your community needs are, a good survey can supplement your own observations and experiences. It can give you detailed information from a larger, more representative group of people than you would get from your observations alone. It's that old analogy or that example I've used with principals for years. After you step over that pile of trash in the front hallway of your school, the third or fourth time, you stop seeing it. And you may need to get an outside set of eyes and get outside opinions. It does help us to get a more honest and objective description of the needs that people might tell you publicly if you do a survey. It may help us become aware of needs that we didn't think were particularly important, but they're important to the group. In many cases, back to the second bullet, you sometimes have to document your needs as part of a program requirement for funding. Many federal grants require a needs assessment. And really to make sure that any actions you eventually take or any actions you join in, consortium that you may be a part of, whatever it may be, are in lines with the needs that are expressed in your community. Too often we have people that will go out and take a reform that's being implemented one place and start implementing it somewhere else when there's really not a need for it. We didn't do our homework and didn't do a needs assessment and find out if that's really needed in our community. Some of the things that are needed in low poverty communities are not needed in affluent communities, and vice versa. If children can't read, or if they don't have, that's maybe not a good example. If they don't have internet service in their home, there may be some better ways than spending your dollars on a one-to-one initiative if you can't get them to have internet service in their homes. So, you just need to understand that. There are some important components of a needs assessment. It's a systematic approach that progresses through a defined series of phases. The first is to explore the existing conditions. That can be done in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about some of those tools here in just a few minutes, but to really assess what the current conditions are. And then second, to gather and analyze data. What are these data and what do they tell us? So many people gather but don't analyze. Sometimes people want to analyze, but they've not done a good job of gathering. And so that's a second component. And then the third component is finally to make some decisions based on the data. So those are, the important components that we have. And I want to talk about each of those. For part one, exploring the existing conditions. Well, you need to first prepare an assessment management plan. Now that sounds complicated. Really, it's not. You just need to sit down and outline what your plan is for managing this process. What is it you're going to do in terms of managing the needs assessment? How are you going to conduct it? What are going to be the components of that, the steps of it, as you're thinking about it? What are the areas of concern? You don't want to go out and this happens from time to time. People go out and survey on something that's really not their area of concern. We're worried about school safety, but we're out here asking questions about parental involvement, and that may not be really germane to what we're talking about. We need to determine some measurable indicators, and certainly surveys have measurable indicators. But what is it? what kind of data that can we collect that's going to help us to make some decisions. And then consider the data sources. Where can we get the data? Sometimes there are pieces of data that we want that we can't acquire. Sometimes there are things that data sources that are readily available to us that may be data sources that we already have in hand that we just don't consider. And then through that, we decide what the preliminary priorities are. What are the major areas of concern? Now, as you're thinking about your work on your artifact for this course and that process of developing that system reform plan, this is steps you'll go through. What is your area? How are you going to collect data, information that will guide you into understanding where the gaps are, what the needs are, and what are those specific areas of concern? What are some measurable indicators that will help you as part of that? And all that would be in your assessment plan. And then what are the data sources? And then decide the preliminary priorities. If you'll follow these steps, you could even use these as headings. Assessment management plan, areas of concern, selection of measurable indicators, data, and then what are the preliminary priorities for that. And then second, part two is to gather and analyze data, determine the target groups. And there's some ways that we can do that. There are some that we routinely think of in our target groups in our education setting. It could be students, it could be parents, teachers, administrators, community members. I would suspect that we'll see several of these emerge in the reform plans that you'll present at the end of the semester. Some of you will have gathered data from and about students. Some will have gathered data from and about parents. Some will gather data from and about the community. The needs assessments are then conducted to determine the needs of the people for whom the system exists. Don't go out and ask the politicians if that's not who you need to be collecting the data from. And a comprehensive needs assessment may be beyond what you'll do for this project, but may be what you do for this project. May take into account needs in other parts of a system. And so you may be looking at something related to instruction, but it may require that you go out and look at the needs, financial needs or facility needs, because you're going to look at what those needs are as it relates to your funding or your resource management or your administration of a particular project. Then we gather the data. As simply as that. We collect the data to determine the needs or gaps. Now, again, I've talked a good bit about surveys, but this may not be, your needs assessment may be gathering some data that is not survey data. It may be data that you have about performance results. It may be data that you have about expenditures. It may be data that you have about downtime for equipment. There are lots of different pieces of data that you could be using to determine these gaps. The pieces that could be that data could be test scores. It could be academic progress data. It could be school improvement involvement data. How many people are coming to your PTA? It could be community engagement data. How many sponsors do you have for your events? What is the typical contribution to your PTA? How many parents are getting the phone messages you deliver at night? How many parents are coming to school events? It could be health indicators. How many incidents of lice have we had in our schools? How many days of sick children being out sick have we had? How many whatever? It could be demographic data. It could be simply data that's illustrative of your student population. It could be personal characteristics. How many teachers have had a master's degree, or how many teachers are getting their renewal done in a timely fashion. It could be operational data. It could be bus run times. It could be information on number of days equipment is down, those kinds of things. So all kinds of needs assessment data that you can use. But then we gather that data, and we prioritize the needs that we had. Those prioritizations are somewhat subjective, but they do need to be data-based decisions. That's the reason we're collecting this data, to really prioritize our needs. If the data comes back to us and it says that what we thought was the priority need for our reform is not really the need, then that's a good thing. Then we've not wasted time and energy implementing a reform that's not needed. But it may lead us to some different reforms in addition to the reform that we're looking at. So, as to do part of that, we have to do the analysis of the data, identify and analyze the cause of these gaps. What is it that's causing them? And if the data is not helping us understand what those causes of the gaps are, then we don't have the right data. And then we need to summarize those findings so that there's an understanding of that. Again, these are the kind of the components that you'll see we'd want to see in your needs assessment as part of your artifact. So, major types of needs assessment tools, and what they tell us. Some of you who are going to be bridging, hopefully at a point at the end to the doctoral program, these are some major types of tools that you'll be using. Questionnaires or surveys, those can be generally quantitative. They give us numerical results that we can do some analysis on. It may be that a tool that we're using is interviews. We're going to interview X number of people, X number of parents, and we're going to get some qualitative data from them. It may be focus groups, a similar situation. Instead of interviewing individually, we're going to bring them in groups, qualitative. It may be audits. You may be looking at audits that have been done by, your school system auditor, your financial people, your transportation people, whomever, and those would give you quantitative data. Some may be qualitative, but it likely quantitative data. They may be environmental scans, and that means going out and looking at what's going on, observing the number of children who do a particular thing, or watching a video of bus videos to see how many children are leaving their seats before the bus stops. Those are the environmental kinds of scans. Those can be quantitative and qualitative. And then finally, the demographics piece, that really is a quantitative piece that describes our population so that we can understand, as those gaps exist within our population, who is affected by those gaps. So finally, the third part is really making decisions with the data. We need to first establish priority needs. With this, you need to really let these things guide you in that. The magnitude of the discrepancies or the gaps that exist between the current and the targeted state should be a guide there. You need to think about the contributing factors to those needs. You need to think about the degree of difficulty that you'll have in addressing those needs. The impact on other parts of the system. You need to think about the cost of implementation in terms of dollars and personnel. And then a risk assessment. Is it risky not to address this issue, this gap? And so as part of that, you're going to establish what the priorities are. What is it that we need to be doing, the broad areas of need, the critical need areas, needs within each area. And so you'll think about those things. Then you need to use that assessment data in a meaningful way. What is the data? What needs are the most critical? And what solutions are best to address the gaps? And you need to think about those. So as part of that, you're identifying the possible solutions, the effects that that your solution might have on the causes of those gaps, the acceptability of those solutions. Is that something that will play well in our community, or will people be up in arms about it? And then the feasibility, can we actually solve this problem? It may be, that with what we know and the information that we collect, it's not feasible that we can implement a reform that will solve this issue that we have. But then after we do that, then we select the solutions. What needs are most critical? What are the possible solutions? And which solutions are best? And then this is the piece that comes as part of, your project for the end of this course. Propose an action plan. That's what we're asking you to do, to propose an action plan on how you will use these data that you've collected, this needs assessment that you've done, to create an action plan that will reform the system. And then you prepare a report on that. And so that third part, is really the kind of overview there. There's no one single, and these are just kind of some important parts. It is a cycle. We talked a lot about cycles tonight. There's no one single best model for a needs assessment. It needs to focus on some desired outcomes. You do need to have measurable indicators that will guide the data collection. You don't just need to wander out here around, thinking about things. You need to collect some data. You need to share information with the stakeholders throughout the process. Here's what we're collecting. Here's why we're collecting it. Here's what we're trying to do. And then you need to have a documentation of that needs assessment in some written report format. Again, it's a cycle. Sometimes it's plan, implement, evaluate, improve, repeat. It may be, you may use that model in your head, plan, do, study, act, but there's some cyclical nature of this within our organizations as we think about reform. Not for this paper, certainly, but as we think about reforms in totality, as school leaders, we need to be doing this all the time. We need to be thinking of how we are going to conduct a needs assessment, and it may be more or less formal at times, but how are we going to, get the data to answer the questions to develop the plan? Don't really want you to overthink that. So what does it mean for your system reform plans? It depends. It depends on the focus area that you're involved with, what the desired outcomes are, and what is available. You may think it's great to go out and do a survey to find out the answer to some big important question, but your leadership in your school district is not going to let you do that. And so, that's important as you think about the system reform plans, as we think about them specifically now. What can you achieve? What can you accomplish? Don't, take too much that you can't do it and that you're not going to be able to do it. Each of your system reform plans is unique. It's tailored to an area and outcomes that you've identified. It's tailored to a reform that your data says needs to be done. And really, it's all driven by the gaps. As you think about setting your in motion these system reform plans that you're looking at doing, you need to be thinking about how to identify the gaps, and then your system reform plan will flow from those gaps as ways to address those gaps. Covey said, always begin with the end in mind. Ultimately, the end for you is a reform plan, but that reform plan will guide this work that you're doing here at the formative stage in terms of conducting the needs assessment. And I just throw this in, as we set our reform plan goals, they need to be based on a needs assessment. We need to have SMART goals within our reform plans. They need to be specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be attainable, realistic, and timely. If you develop a plan of reform for your district, you need to think about these things. How is it going to be a specific plan that's going to meet those gaps? How are you going to measure your progress on this reform plan? Is it something that's attainable? Don't, put the sky as the limit. Make your reform plan something that is doable within the context of your school district. If it's going to be, $1 billion to do it, and that's not within your school district's budget, then don't go there. So make it realistic. but also make it timely, make it something that can be accomplished. I've shared, I think with this class, there's some of these that I've done, things that I've done even as graduate projects like this. My master's project was really a needs assessment, a facilities needs assessment, and a reform plan, development plan, facilities plan for a school district. And I wound up implementing that plan, starting out as a director and then assistant superintendent. And many of the components of that plan that I did for my master's degree followed me through my career in Mooresville. And so, think about that as you develop these plans, something that is feasible to do, that may be something that can really help you in your career. That's certainly not the only reason to do it, but I hope you're doing things, as I've said before, that will help you in your quest to get the next administrative position, because they help you, number one, become known by the folks in your school district that you're working with, but also they help you show that you have the capacity to lead and to make some things happen. And I hope that that'll be the case for you. Let me stop, and I believe that's our last slide. And so let me go back and see, are there questions about your needs assessment, your artifact, any of that I've talked about? I've gone through it rather hurriedly. You have the PowerPoint. I'll post that for you on Blackboard, and so you'll have these kind of steps to kind of guide you through the way. Are there questions? Anybody? Well, let's talk briefly, real quickly then, about your reform paper topics, not the needs assessment and the system reform plan, but your topics. I have, I think, four of you that I have your topics for, and so let's check and make sure that we're on target there. Jan, have you down for grading practices? Is that correct?
Yes.
Everything's good there. You're finding enough information on that one?
Oh, yes.
I would expect to. Lauren, you have, charter schools?
Yep.
Everything good there? You're getting good information on that?
Yeah, same too.
Okay. Kevin, you've got leadership reform, is that right? Can you hear me, Kevin? I'm having sound trouble there. Adrian, are you able to hear us? And Sharon, you had kindergarten early assessment, right?
Yes, sir.
And you got plenty, you're finding plenty there.
Yes, sir.
I'm not saying that you all need to do this, but I can see even within these reform paper topics, school reform plan ideas that would come out of those, with grading practices, charter schools, and the kindergarten early assessment. Those are the ones that you could develop into your school reform plans, if that's what you so desire. So, hopefully you're looking at those things and doing that. Just need to be working on those papers. We've got several weeks before those are due. What the date on that is for those. Let me look and see here while we're talking about it in my syllabus. Apologize, I didn't have that written down. That is on October the 13th, and so we have about a month for those reform papers. So you need to be working on those in earnest now. In about 2 weeks, we'll start on the chapter presentations and the topic presentations that you'll have for class from the ELC work. No, we don't have all those covered. The ones that you all have not signed up for, I'll cover in class lectures, but you need to be probably prioritizing, and I'm now talking about the task for the week, getting that done. And then you do need to be thinking, if you're not already working on your system reform plan, focus. You need to be making those contacts for that now. We're 4 weeks into the semester, so that means you've got about 10 weeks, 2.5 months out there to kind of get that. I want to pace you on that. And so if you don't be waiting to make those contacts, some of you've learned from hard times that it's sometimes hard to get those central office people to respond to you when you're trying to do these artifacts and get cooperation. So be sure you're out there working on getting that now. We have 3 chapters to read in the Kayak and Cuba book. We have chapters 3, 4, and 5 for next week. No other assignments other than that. So you've got plenty of time to be working on those things that we talked about here in the task assignment. Okay. Any questions or comments tonight? Adrian, I'm seeing your. I hope you're hearing me. I can see your comments. I haven't pointed that out, but you found it, and I hope everybody else has found it. Just as we go forward with Zoom, if you ever do have a problem, a couple of things. There is a chat feature down at the bottom that you should see. You can chat either to the whole group, or you can chat with individual class members privately. So you can use that, or you can chat with me privately if there's something you can tell me that's going on, and that works well. Send me a message. Again, I don't know what was the problem. What the actual problem was at the beginning of class, why it didn't load. This class is set up as a reoccurring class, and so we should be using that 460-421-307 class meeting every week. It should be the same one, so I'm not sure why it didn't start the first time, but we'll keep working on that, and I'll try and see if I can figure out the problem there, so we won't have that problem again. I do appreciate, Lauren, you give me a call and let me know. I'd have sat here and talked to myself all night that you all had more important things to do tonight than class, and I knew that wasn't the case. It was so uncharacteristic of this class not to be there, because you all are faithful to attend class or let me know when you're not going to be attending. Knew something must be up. But if there's ever a problem, certainly Lauren did tonight, feel free to call me on my cell phone. When I saw that come up, I knew there must be something going on there. Okay. Hang on. So any other comments or questions tonight before we close? If not, I hope you all have a good rest of the week. I hope it's cool. Everybody's starting to cool down a little bit here as we get into the beginning of fall. I have to go your way, Jan, to Mars Hill this weekend, so I'm looking forward to being in the mountains up there, where it's really nice and cool.
It's been in the 40s the last couple of nights.
Y'all gonna have to make a weather call before too long. Y'all close school for weather.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, it won't be long. So, well, I hope you all are doing well, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good evening.
Dr. Moore.
Yes.
Good evening.
Yes.
I just had a quick question.
Okay.
For some reason, I can't seem to see any more or the discussion board at all.
There's nothing. You don't have a discussion.
Okay, I didn't know. Like none of the past ones I could see, so I didn't know if I needed to be able to see them or.
No, I don't know why it's not showing them. I'll check on that. Maybe the way I've got it set. I'll check that and see. But there's nothing that you have right now. The only one are the ones that we've already completed. So
right.
It's good.
Okay.
All right. I'll check on that. Thanks, Lauren.
All right.
Adrian, can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you. If you want to call me on my cell phone, that's fine. Or here at the office, either one. My cell phone is 704-473-6721. 704-473-6721. If you want to call me, that'd be fine. For some reason, I'm not sure what's going on, why I can't hear you. I can get your chats, but I can't hear you. And I can see it shows that your microphone is not on. I mean, is on. So, and when I look at the participant list, it shows your microphone is on. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Okay. So, Kevin, I can see your message too. Can you hear me? Okay, for some reason we haven't been able to hear you tonight. Again, I'm not sure what the problem was. It may have been something related to that glitch of getting class started. I'm not sure why we had the problem at the very beginning. And so hopefully we'll have better luck next time. Okay. Have a good evening.